Southern University. It is with great pleasure that I speak in front of all of you today on the impact of such an important project as the new Silk Road on the political and economic development of my country. Egypt had already a pivotal role in the old Silk Road, which was disrupted and disintegrated in 1720. Back then, thanks to its geographic position and its unique capabilities, Egypt participated in enriching the system of old roads that used to link between the continents of the ancient world. Thus, aside of being the principal entrance for the transfer of goods and people between Asia and the Arab world, Egypt had also a major role in the human development of the ancient world with the transfer of culture. We are all aware of how the Egyptians managed to transfer important sciences between ancient civilizations, which had a great impact on the development of the whole human civilization back then. Thus, as soon as the Chinese president, Xi Jinping, announced in October 2013 his initiative of reviving the Silk Road in both its maritime and land sections, the Egyptian-Chinese relations gained a new momentum and were transformed into a full partnership between the two countries. This was highlighted during the visit of the Chinese president to Cairo in January 2016. During this visit, the Egyptian role was transcended from being just a station on the Silk Road to a major partner without which the initiative could not be complete. During my intervention, I will present the Egyptian role in the new Silk Road project based on the following points. Why is Egypt interested in the Chinese initiative? How is Egypt's participation important in the success of the new Silk Road project? The development of the Egyptian-Chinese relations thanks to the new Silk Road project, and what is the way ahead for Egypt? So, my first point is, why is Egypt interested in the Chinese initiative? Egypt and China both share the same vision when it comes to the objectives of the new Silk Road. They both consider that the economic cooperation, the human and cultural interactions, the principle of non-interference in other countries' internal affairs, the policy of open doors, and the access to development are all basic tools to achieve peace, prosperity, and stability to all countries. Moreover, as the leading country in the Middle East and Africa, Egypt is very keen to adopt this initiative because it considers it to be the material representation of the development by peace. In fact, Egypt sees the new Silk Road to be the economic and developmental gateway that will give solutions to the region's economic and political crisis and will overcome the sources of clashes through the establishment of dialogue and interaction between nations. As far as the main objectives of the new Silk Road are concerned, Egyptian expectations consist of increase in the trade flows, creation of global added value chains, harmonization of economic and monetary policies, development of transportation infrastructures and networks, adjustment of projects between the different beneficiaries, and support of understanding between nations through cultural and people exchanges. All these objectives are in line with the development strategy of the actual Egyptian leadership, consisting of sustained development and big national projects aiming at ameliorating the Egyptian infrastructure as well as the renewal of both the industrial and agricultural sectors. These objectives are also in line with Egypt's endeavors to promote its financial and monetary policies and to improve its administrative structure through adopting the most up-to-date technologies. My second point is about how Egypt's participation is important in the success of the new Silk Road project. Egypt has always had a pivotal role in the international trade flows and in China's foreign commercial transactions because of its geographical position as a center between three continents, Africa, Asia, and Europe. It is the only crossing point of the maritime Silk Road between the Indian Ocean and the European continent, as well as Northern Africa. Thus, it is impossible to realize the Silk Road without Egypt's participation and partnership. Egypt is actually conducting the biggest and most comprehensive infrastructural development in the Middle East and Africa. The new Suez Canal is the international maritime passage linking the Indian Ocean with the Mediterranean Sea. It benefits from unprecedented power to absorb the estimated increase in commercial flows for long years to come. It also enjoys a preferential treatment in the economic field from the east of the United States and South Europe till Southeast Asia. In parallel to the new Suez Canal, Egypt is also investing in development pathways by connecting roads and transportation networks. The most recent pathways are East and West Portside Port, Al Adabia Port, Ain El Sokhna Port, El Arish Port, El Tur Port, and the Ismailia Technology Valley Project. Egypt's assets do not only rely on its traditional industry. It also invests in new, innovative, and scientific industrial products. As an apparent example, we can notice that the industrial zone in the Suez Canal provides logistic and industrial services to Saudi Arabia, which constitutes a gate to the Gulf countries, to the maritime port of Mombasa in Kenya, and to Djibouti as a gate to Ethiopia and the center of Africa. Moreover, as far as Egypt's role in facilitating China's foreign trade is concerned, China benefits from both the Egyptian internal market, which possesses a high purchasing power, 11% increase of bilateral trade between Egypt and China in 2015, and from the treaties Egypt has signed with a large number of countries, such as the Arab Free Trade Area, the Common Market for East and Southern Africa, the EU-Egypt Association Agreement, the Free Trade Agreement between Egypt, Jordan, Morocco, and Tunisia, the Agadir Agreement, the Trade Agreement between Egypt and the Mercosur bloc comprising Argentina, Brazil, Paraguay, and Uruguay, in addition to the bilateral preferential agreements with Turkey and the USA. China's access to all these markets through Egypt gives its exports a 2 billion people market. My third point, the development of the Egyptian-Chinese relations thanks to the new Silk Road. Although Egypt and China have shared centuries-long relations and 60 years of official bilateral diplomatic ties, I would like to underline 2016 as a crucial year in the development of these relations. In fact, during the Chinese President Xi Jinping's visit to Egypt in January 2016, the bilateral relations were promoted to a comprehensive strategic partnership. A Memorandum of Understanding, MOU, was signed between the two parties to implement the Silk Road project, in addition to the signature of 20 different Memorandum of Understandings, including the development of the Suez Canal corridor and the construction of a new administrative capital, and the expansion of bilateral cooperation in trade, finance, space technology, energy, human resources development, and security. During this visit as well, China agreed to invest the amount of $15 billion in Egyptian projects, and a new big industrial zone, more than 75 million square feet, was allocated to China in the Suez Canal zone in order to encourage Chinese companies to invest, especially those from China's competitive sectors such as textile and steel. It is noteworthy that China has already more than 86 companies active in the Suez Canal zone worth $1.1 billion of investments. China is also benefiting from Egypt's being one of the founders of the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, AIIB. So what is the way ahead for Egypt? Egypt benefits once again from its geostrategic position in the African continent. China's vision intends to include the east coast of Africa and is building important infrastructure projects there, among which maritime ports in Tanzania, railroads between Mombasa Maritime Port and the Kenyan capital Nairobi, and modernization of maritime structures in Djibouti. Therefore, Egypt's position will allow the Chinese party to have access to the east coast of the continent and to its center as well. Recently, a string of sizable natural gas discoveries has been made in the eastern Mediterranean region on the coast of Egypt's Nile Delta. These finds attract China, who is considered to be one of the biggest markets in the world in the consumption of natural gas from the time being and in the future. From all what has been presented in my intervention, it's clear more than ever how such an important project as the new Silk Road project impacts on the peace process all over the world. My country, Egypt, is part of 10 regions, the Middle East from one side and the African continent from another side. And for decades, it participated in trying to find a peaceful solution and just solution to these ongoing conflicts. Notwithstanding all the efforts that were exerted, the situation in these regions is still volatile and fragile. Peace through economic development is thus not only a new paradigm, it is also a new viable solution, as political and military solutions have failed to achieve their objectives. And allow me to end my intervention with these citations of Lauren K. Freeman, researcher and editor of Executive Intelligence Review magazine. Today, there is also an alternative future visible for African nations. It is represented first and foremost by the shift undertaken by the Egyptian government of Abdel Fattah el-Sisi toward crash programs of major infrastructures development, which would not only lift up the condition of the Egyptian people, but also link up Africa and the Eurasian continent. The second quotation, Egypt can indeed be a model for nations in Africa and throughout the world of how to turn around an economy for the general welfare of its citizens, present and future. I thank you.
Consul of the Egyptian Consul, Reham Kholeif, that was excellent. Thank you. You made a point as far as connecting with the new Silk Road, connecting with China. And one, as we bring up Brian Lantz, one of the key connections is also when there's unity, there's so much power in what we can accomplish. And you said accomplishing these things through economic development, using peaceful methods, overcoming some of the world's weaknesses, some of the countries where we are seeing. Last year, the United Nations indicated the next 30 years should be the years of getting out of poverty. And when you have projects where people work together in unity, getting out of poverty is a reality for many countries. And on that, let's bring in Brian Lantz, my new friend. He's representing the Schiller Institute. Brian is a founding member and representative of the Schiller Institute. He's here, founded in 1984 by Helga Zapp LaRoche. The Schiller Institute is working around the world to defend the rights of all humanity to progress, material, cultural, and intellectual. Mr. Lantz has been engaged in dialogue on these topics for 4 decades as a researcher, writer, and activist. On economics, Lantz has begun a series of presentations on the reports of the Treasury Secretary Alexander Hamilton. the father of the American system of political economy, Lantz shows that Hamilton would recognize strong parallels between his own thinking and the principles of the work in China's rapid economic and human development, lifting 800 million people out of poverty in less than 40 years. Now that's truly amazing. And if we can continue in unity, as it says, if they're in unity, there's nothing that we cannot do. Brian Lantz, please.
Thank you, Professor Rodriguez. Can I be heard, or should I? No. Oh. Testing, testing. There we are. Okay. All right. Okay, let's see, we got to get that out of here.
I'll get it for you.
Okay. Thank you. Right here, the chromium. Yep. That's what he just clicked on, and it brought up her. Try the chromium again. This is Mike. Mike's helping out here.
Hello. Here you go. Slides.
Oh, there we go. Okay.
Okay.
All right.
And
Thank you, Mike.
yeah. All right. Okay. Well, yes. I mean, so much has been covered. Hopefully, what I will present will just kind of fill out many of the concepts and bring in more to the fore the role of the United States. Not only the role with the Silk Road, but the transformation of the United States by adopting Hamiltonian policies again. And I'll come to that at the conclusion. What you see on the screen now is well, it's the conference that we held in Berlin, as noted there, in June of just this last year, creating a common future for mankind and a renaissance of classical culture. There were participants from 23 countries that took part as in presentations over those 2 days. And the key point I want to start with, and it really underscores what Consul Kholeif referenced or closed with, that we really are on the verge, on the cusp of creating a global security concept to replace geopolitics. And I want to just say a word, because that word gets thrown around. I want to say a word about it. Power blocks. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. I have no permanent friends, only permanent interests. These are geopolitical concepts, the Cold War concepts, concepts of empire and so forth. It goes back to Sir Halford Mackinder at the turn of the last century. But we're still operating, in fact, operating more today, or have been, in that framework, in thinking about the world and our role in it. But now, with the new Silk Road, with the Belt and Road Initiative, the BRICS nations, we have a just new world order coming into perspective. And security is security through economic development. It's security through finding the basis of collaboration among nations, as Deputy Consul General Zhao, as well as Consul Kholeif have emphasized. Win-win, mutual benefit, mutual consultation, and so forth. These are terms that are used on the Belt and Road. Ambassador Chas Freeman was one of the speakers, one of the keynote speakers at our conference in Berlin. He's one of the United States' most senior diplomats. He translated for President Nixon in the trip to China, the opening up to China. He went on to become a major ambassador in the Middle East. And he continues to play a major role in foreign policy making. In speaking at our conference in June, he emphasized, he said, that the Belt and Road Initiative, what China has undertaken, is the greatest infrastructure program in the history of mankind. And if the U.S. were to cooperate with it, the world would breathe a sigh of relief. So here we have a picture of the Belt and Road. We've been talking about it. This is from Mercator. I want to emphasize a few different points here. Here, let me say the corridors that we've been talking about of economic development. These are not, for example, with railway or maritime, these are not simply point to point. It's not from getting from point A to B like flying an airplane. The corridors are themselves open up vast areas, vast resources, most importantly human creative resources, to develop, to build new cities. If we think back to the Continental Railroad, the Transcontinental Railroad in the United States, initiated by Abraham Lincoln, it gives you an idea of this. But now this process is accelerated. And so you have these projects, inland ports, new cities, transportation hubs. There are now, for example, across the Eurasian land bridge that was referred to earlier, you now have 39 different routes between China and Europe, Europe including Russia, 39 routes. You have just signed the agreement to build the railroad from Moscow to Kazan, HighSpeed Rail. When that's completed all the way to Beijing, a trip that takes weeks will be a matter of hours. These projects transform space-time relations among people and the productive process as a whole. Everything changes. Relationships change. In terms of China's own development of high-speed rail, in which it leads the world, as you probably know, over some 20,000 kilometers of high-speed rail. We don't have a single mile in the United States yet. We've got to get on that. There was the idea that these railroads being built by China would in fact never pay off. The costs were just too enormous. How could you build such projects? Well, already The Economist, the magazine London Economist, you may know it as, which is one of those that were poo-pooing this whole process, had to admit a few weeks ago in its publication that in fact already these railroads, these high-speed rail systems, the busiest of them, have doubled the business activity along these lines. In other words, 50% of those traveling on these high-speed rail had never traveled those routes before. The movement of people, of produce, of product, of ideas is accelerated. So the very relations, the very nature of human thinking, and thinking in terms of what's possible and what can be brought into being, are changed affirmatively. A kind of optimism is spread. Let me continue here. The corridors, but I've covered that. I just want to give you a picture. Most of you, I hope, have seen these. These are examples of high-speed rail trains in China. You also find them, of course, in Japan. But this is what we're talking about. 300, 400 kilometer an hour high-speed transport. A grid of this, transforming relations. Think of that in terms of the United States. I wanted to also emphasize that this process that we're talking about here, this new concept of global security, this is already a complex of nations. Deputy Consul General Zhao was emphasizing the Belt and Road Initiative, rightfully. It isn't just a matter that he's from China. It's something to be rightfully emphasized. It's the cutting edge. But already we have the BRICS nations, which have come into being: Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, the BRICS nations. This is a cooperative arrangement among nations, and they'll be holding their next annual summit in Beijing, I believe in September. This represents another overlapping collaboration of efforts. There's the new development bank that's been created by the BRICS nations, other associations, cultural exchanges, scientific forums, new schools, and so forth. Now, in terms of Africa, to put a little more meat on the bone, on the left is a photograph or a schematic of roughly the railroad system that's existed in the continent of Africa up until now. Almost all of it's colonial railroad that simply moved material from the mines to the ports. Simply a colonial policy, a one-way, really a one-way ticket. On the right is the process that's beginning to be built out. One of the most recent railroads that's been open, and you may have heard something about this, is the high-speed rail or electrified rail from Djibouti to the capital of Ethiopia, Addis Ababa. Uncharacteristically, the New York Times had a wonderful article on this on February 7th by Andrew Jacobs, titled Joyous Africans Take to the Rails with China's Help. This is the first electrified rail to connect two countries in Africa. It already has averted famine in the area reached by it. Kenya has a similar railroad project underway, a collaborative effort between Kenya and China. And there's projects from Egypt, plans from Egypt reaching south, highways, rails, from Egypt down, as the transportation minister spoke about it last year, all the way to the Cape. These are the intentions. Part of that, if you go back to that last map, is for the first time rails that reach all the way across the continent. For the first time in Africa. Here's another project. And let me just mention a few in terms of the complex of nations involved here. Besides the BRICS, there's the institutions like the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, of course. There's the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, ASEAN, are all being brought into this collaborative effort. So I just wanted to fill that out. But here we have a map of one of what will be one of the largest projects. If you look at the smaller map up in the upper right-hand corner, you get the dimensions of this. This is a water project for the Chad Basin. Lake Chad, which is drying out, which has created a festering hellhole as it's collapsed. Boko Haram is active in the southwest part of this area, just as an example, and so forth. Well, this project, which we have promoted for over a decade, probably 2 decades, was referred to as Project Transaqua. It was developed by Italian engineering company, but no one would take it up. IMF, World Bank, you name it, consortia, no one would take up this project. It will move water from the tributaries to the Congo, not from the Congo itself, through a system of dams into a canal that will run northwest into Lake Chad. But along the way, it will open up a tremendous area for economic development. These tributaries being tapped will also generate millions of kilowatts of energy in terms of electricity for the area. This is really reaching an entire 12-nation area. This has now been taken up by Power China, the company that built Three Gorges Dam, the largest hydroelectric facility in the country. A memorandum has been signed. Power China will now work through and update Transaqua, and together with the Chad Basin nations and Nigeria, they will then move on. The intention is to move on and construct a project that will take decades to complete, but will transform 12 nations in terms of their capabilities, in terms of their the possibilities of growing human creative activity in all forms. So this is an example. No one would take this up until Power China came along. And now it's moving forward for the first time. This is similar projects in South America in terms of transoceanic projects that are proposed. China's deeply engaged in that. Now, how does the United States get into this? How do we join? This is a picture, you can see it there, titled The World Land Bridge. And I don't know if you can make it out, but here is, from the top down, here's the connection between Eurasia and onto Africa and the Americas through Canada, the United States, and on down into Latin America, the Caribbean, and South America. The crossing of the Bering Straits. Oh, okay, thank you. Is the question of building a tunnel, a 100-mile-plus tunnel. This is a drawing by, for a paper done on this project by Dr. Hal Cooper, a leading railroad engineer, collaborator of ours. Just gives you an idea of what this project would look like to link the Americas and Eurasia. This is well, you can see a cutaway of what that tunnel would look like across the Bering Straits. Now, this has been proposed since the 19th century on both sides of the from the American side and from the Russian side. Well, now, for the first time, there is a discussion process. The same parties involved in the Russia-Kazan high-speed rail are now planning to build, this is in the planning stages, but the intention is to build a rail system up to the Bering Straits. Why not cross it? Now, in the United States itself, this is one proposal in terms of a U.S. high-speed rail system built out in 2 phases. A total of 40,000 miles of high-speed rail and maglev. The second phase in red is maglev, which takes us to the next level. Why would we do this? We would do it for the same reasons that the Eurasian land bridge, the Silk Road, and so forth are being dealt collaboratively among the nations of Eurasia and Africa. How do you transform the workforce of the United States? How do you rebuild the productive capacity of our nation? This is just a simple, drawn from the U.S. government figures, of the collapse of the labor participation rate in the United States. We could also take charts of growing opioid addiction, suicide rates. All of this has been documented. It's all in the public domain, published from government sources. We're in a crisis in the United States. Well, we've got to create a future. And we've got to, and the part of creating a future is to create a new skilled workforce, not just of a certain level, but a workforce that increasingly sees itself as unlimited in terms of its capacities to grow and develop. high-speed rail is among the most efficient ways to transform your own population, to move it up the skill level, to move it up the educational and cultural level, to transform the culture of the nation. If we want to bring the nation together, we have to bind it. Right? And we can bind it with steel, we can bind it with other forms of connectivity, but this is the process that we're now on the verge of. I don't know if you heard it, President Trump a day or two ago was saying, the Chinese have all this high-speed rail. We don't have any high-speed rail. And our airports and our airplanes are, our airlines are getting worse all the time. I mean, these are just quips, he kicks these around. But the point is, there's now a discussion of infrastructure being a necessary critical investment that now has to be made in the United States. This is a break with Wall Street. It's a break with the idea that money simply is made by making money. As opposed to the monetary process, a monetary process serving a more fundamental purpose, which is to grow the physical economy. And the core element in growing a physical economy is to develop the creative capacities of your people. And those people have been left on the side of the road, so to speak, over the last few decades. The collapse of our manufacturing workforce, inner city crises, you name it. Okay, that's the consequence. So now we have an opportunity. We have an opportunity to make a giant leap and build that world land bridge. Now, how do you finance this? China accumulated a great deal of foreign exchange in the course of trade over the last few decades. They're now utilizing that, they're leveraging that, not only for themselves but for the world. That's profoundly important. But what do we do? The Democratic Congress has introduced at least 2-3 bills to the tune of $1 trillion that they propose to build in terms of infrastructure. Their proposals is to go further into debt to do it. The Trump administration has circulated a proposal that would say to hedge funds and so forth, hey, we've got a deal for you. We're going to offer you tax benefits. We're going to basically give you tax breaks to the tune of $200-300 billion. And in exchange, you will come in and put $200-300 billion in as capital, and we'll create an infrastructure bank. And then we'll bring in the hedge funds, because, boy, we can create a revenue stream by building what? Toll roads. Building, Deputy Consul General Zhao made the point. Large projects don't pay off in 5, 10, 15, 20 years. They're long. You've got to have foresight. You've got to have a commitment to the future. And you're going to build your way into that future. That's what you're doing with what you're putting onto the ground in terms of what we're talking about here. Well, if you followed this, President Abe, Prime Minister Abe of Japan, was just here in the United States and offered $150 billion in terms of investment into the United States, and said to President Trump, well, we can build a maglev from New York to Washington, D.C., and it will get you from Trump Tower to Washington, D.C. in an hour. And that's true. That could be done today. There's no such thing that exists in the United States right now. All right? China, the CIC, the Chinese Investment Corporation, which is apparently the second largest sovereign wealth fund in the world, with over $800 billion in assets, has proposed this is in Hong Kong a few weeks ago, proposed, and this was covered in Bloomberg, Business Insider, so on, Wall Street Journal, and so forth, it proposed that they would like to take a very significant proportion of the 200 billion plus that they have in government bonds and put it into U.S. government or U.S. infrastructure. Well, we're now up to 350 billion. In other words, money that left the United States, in a certain, you could look at it in a certain way in terms of the trade deficit, comes back as investment back into the United States. Well, if we create a national bank, or we can call it an infrastructure bank, but if we create a national bank and say to these parties, to these funds and others, including in the United States, invest these funds as capital into this bank, to capitalize this bank, then this bank can issue a multiple of that capital as credits for long-term projects. We can ensure a return of 5%. We can tie it to a tax revenue stream. We'll be doing exactly what Treasury Secretary Alexander Hamilton did to pull the United States together at the end of the American Revolution. When we were in hock, we were busted, broke, and the only thing we had was debt. We got everyone who had that debt to put their money into what became the first national bank of the United States, to capitalize it, to invest in the future of the country, canals, roads, so on and so forth. We can do exactly that process again. So it's within reach. We can do this, and we can become a major part of the New Silk Road. And I would just add, just from the standpoint of Texas, as just part of this picture, look, we're on the doorstep of the Caribbean nations, of South America. We have, of course, business relations and so forth already, oil, gas, you name it, tourism and so forth. However, what's now going on in South America, I passed over it very quickly. In South America, China, Russia, other countries are joining with countries such as Bolivia, Peru, and so forth, to build out a whole new infrastructure, including rail. But for example, in Bolivia, a nuclear research city. Evo Morales' intent, the president, on turning Bolivia into a center of high-tech knowledge and nuclear science for all of South America. Ecuador, China's teamed with the government of Ecuador to build out a science city in Ecuador. Now, the dams, all these other projects have been built and are being built and are being expanded throughout South America as we speak, including in Chile, as was referenced. Not only in terms of the electrical side of the thing, the interconnectivity in terms of cable and so on and so forth, but also in terms of boring a tunnel, from one side of South America down there towards the tip, to connect the countries on both sides of that rocky divide. Now, as that infrastructure is all built out, that means you're dealing with an entirely different set of societies with new capabilities that Texas could be selling, could be exporting into, in terms of high-tech manufacturing, into South America and likewise the Caribbean. As opposed to being oil and gas, and so forth, limited and so forth in terms of our capabilities and how far that reaches in terms of our own state, in terms of its repercussions, positive effects. We could transform Texas in the process of this transformation of the Americas. So again, this is another example of how this process could unfold. So we hope, and we're making an effort on this. We hope that President Trump will attend the Belt and Road Initiative Summit in May in Beijing. And likewise, our task here is to win over the American people to this perspective, which is really a revival not only of Hamilton, but of Lincoln, of Roosevelt, Franklin Roosevelt, of John F. Kennedy. And just finally, space, the space program. The revival of the U.S. space program. China is going there. It's going to the backside of the moon in the next year. The United States, I mean, as you know, we're dependent on Russia just to get to the space station, right? To get people up and down, but also the rocket engines, you know, of the Boeing Lockheed United company. Those rocket engines are Russian rocket engines. We buy them from Russia. I mean, look, let's, you know, and the way forward on this is a collaboration. Space is not empty. This is the frontier for the future of mankind, to move out and discover principles that affect us, that shape, for example, climate change in a way that we're not even looking at generally now, in terms of understanding that process. To other planets, discovering new laws of physics with very, very fundamental, real consequences for industry, for science, for knowledge, for medicine, and so on and so forth. So this is where mankind must go to gain control, ever greater control over his environment, for his own future, and we can go there together. Thank you very much.
Could I invite you to the panel, please?
So,
Thank you, Professor.
Okay, I think we can agree. We have some hands. I have a couple hands up. What we will do, we have a microphone here. Please use the microphone since it's being recorded, and